On the New Year night, around 2,000 Arab and North African men have occupied a square in the German city of Köln and then attacked random women. At the time of this recording, 2 rapes have been alleged and a total of 112 women alleged to have been victims of sexual harassment, groping, and other petty, dishonorable, and uncivilized behavior. At least 18 of the men involved are asylum seekers. I hope I got this euphemism right. But how bad is it? And more importantly, should we even care? Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Okay, so this one may be a bit longer because the answers to the 2 questions in the intro are quite complex and I'd rather not come back to this topic later on. First of all, let's dispel some myths that have emerged on the right and on the left. First of all, no, there is no rape culture in Köln, and yes, I'll call it Köln and not Cologne because I think it is offensive to call a German city by its French name. So, there is no rape culture in Köln. The idea that there have been swaths of massive gang rapes everywhere in the New Year night is ridiculous. Only 2 such acts have been reported, and although similar events occurred in the same night in Helsinki, Kalmar, that is in Sweden, and Zurich, Switzerland, as well as other German cities, the 2 rapes in Köln are the only ones who have been recorded. And again, it's 2 allegations, not evidence. The distinction matters. Secondly, yes, my dear leftists, the issue of immigration is connected to these incidents. The idea that the 2 are separate events, or worse, that the responsibility lies with white men, is completely retarded and straight out of the mental asylum. Thirdly, there is no evidence that these events were a false flag operation, and yes, some leftists actually believe that. Actually, the claim is not just hardly falsifiable, but also unrealistic, given that pulling off such an action is very costly, very hazardous, and with dubious gains. But we'll talk more about that in a few minutes, especially about the coordination aspect, because there are some legitimate questions to be asked on that front. Anyway, fourthly, it is not Islamophobic, nor is it racist to have predicted this or expected it to happen, as it is my case. It is perfectly reasonable to think that once you import 1.1 million people, most of them young men of military age, from a completely different culture, and yes, inferior culture, it is perfectly reasonable, even from a leftist point of view, to think that at least 0.1% of them are going to be hooligans. It's not rocket science. In a very large group of people, the possibility of having a few criminals amongst them asymptotically tends towards 100%. 0.1% of 1.1 million is 1,100 people. At the time of this recording, around 40 asylum seekers are suspected to have been part of this. It's perfectly reasonable, and it was within the realistic realm of possibilities that such thing not only could, but would happen. This is something that should be accepted even by the hardline pro-immigrationists. It's really basic statistics and basic mathematics. It's nothing political in this, it's just how real life works. Anyway, now, I'm as anti-mass Islamic immigration as anyone else and generally opposed to mass uncontrolled immigration. As a libertarian, I tend to like my own culture over someone else's, especially very different ones, and I also see national security and border enforcement as one of the few legitimate roles of the government. However, I am not in favor of lies. I believe that my position, and dare I say our position, can be forwarded without lying at all. Our philosophical opponents and the actual reality are damning enough for us to make our case. We just don't need to make things up. That's why I don't think it is productive to have headlines like Cologne migrant rapists, no matter how tempting that may be. We know around 40 recent migrants were involved in this, but we don't know if any of them is a rapist, a sexual harasser, or just a plain dickhead who pulled some punches. Because let's not forget that there were other incidents besides the sexual ones as well. Now, I insist upon these distinctions not because I care about the public image of migrants, I couldn't give a flying toss about that, but I do it because I care about the truth. And the truth is that we don't know all the facts yet. And this brings me to my next argument, namely that the reason we don't know all the facts and the biggest enemy right now is the German administration, the bureaucrats, the officials, the police, and the cathedral media. The migrants may be violent thugs and adepts of an inferior culture, but it's not their fault that the public institutions have worked really hard to conceal anything related to this series of incidents. I learned about the incidents in samizdat format in January 3, and the press started printing things only on January 4 or even January 5. That would be 6 days after the incident. The publication ZDF publicly admitted and apologized for concealing vital information for at least 24 hours before releasing it to the public. There's a growing body of evidence as well that the police themselves intentionally avoided publicizing anything about this case. Recently, also the Köln police chief was suspended from his position, also in relation to this concealment. Even more to the point, the interior minister of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, of which Köln is part of, recently stated that the fact that we speak amongst ourselves about these incidents is at least as bad as the migrants attacking random women in the streets. In addition to this mentality being straight out of the leftist la-la land, the presence of this mentality at the highest level of public office is also not the fault of migrants. Just as it's not the fault of migrants that as people, mostly women but also some men, were being attacked in Köln in New Year's night, Chancellor Merkel was holding her speech, subtitled in Arabic. To say that she didn't know what was happening is to live in the fantasy land. Of course she knew, but she didn't care. None of these are the fault of migrants. Just like it's not the fault of migrants that Germany is one of the few countries in Europe, alongside with Britain, who actually raids people's homes and arrests people for making politically incorrect posts on Facebook about diversity, progress, and youth violence. Now, do you see where I'm going with this? Those politicians were not voted in there by migrants, but by your average German. Now, I'll explain more about this in a research and analysis episode called Why Do European Politicians Hate Europeans? But until then, let me give you some facts. The female mayor of Köln was attacked and stabbed by an Islamist a while before the local elections. She did not change her tune at all, and doubled down on the pro-diversity and anti-German rhetoric. And she won with that. Now, after these incidents, she issued guidelines of behavior for women and advised them to stay at an arm's length of a stranger man, for their safety, of course. She is the elected official of the city and a victim of Islamic violence herself, and she still thinks like that. So in this context, I'm very serious when I'm asking whether we should even care. You can call me an extremist and an uncaring asshole all you like, but the facts show me that the people of Köln have gotten exactly what they wanted. I mean, nobody forced them to vote for more diversity, and nobody forced them to vote for a mayor that simply doesn't get it, even after she herself gets the proverbial kick in the teeth from diversity and vibrant communities. This is why my empathy towards the victims is quite low, next to non-existent. I mean, why should I care, and indeed why should anyone care, that those who democratically and freely elected a bunch of idiots to lead them are now getting the logical consequences for what they voted? Now, I may not be a fan of democracy, but at the end of the day, a democratic system tends to provide its people the government that it deserves. Anyway, back to the first question. How bad is it? Let's dwell a bit on coordination. Now, whilst there is no evidence that this incident was a false flag, and I suspect no such evidence will ever emerge because that would make it the most stupid false flag operation ever, there are some facts that should generate their own questions. For instance, the gathering of close to 2,000 men, all of them of non-German citizenship or ethnicity, into one place to attack random women is very hard to paint as a coincidence. It is even harder to believe it's a coincidence when at the same time several other attacks, albeit on a smaller scale, were also taking place in other German cities such as Stuttgart or Hamburg. Things get a lot more bizarre once we introduce the fact that at the same time more such attacks were taking place outside of Germany. As I said earlier, similar attacks were reported in Switzerland, Finland, and Sweden. Even more bizarre is the fact that Belgium preemptively banned any New Year public celebrations, citing fears of terrorist attacks based on their inside intel. Now, did Belgium know something that Germany, Switzerland, Finland, and Sweden did not? If that's the case, then the coordination argument becomes even stronger. If it's not the case, and Belgium made its move simply out of sheer paranoia, then we're back to square one. Anyway, based on these facts, allow me to advance two, or dare I say 2.5 hypotheses, with the caveat that I don't purport any of them, or one of them, or anything like that is true. But there are the most logical scenarios I can come up with right now, based on the facts that we already have. So, hypothesis number 1. The attacks were coordinated, but at a national level or even at a local level and not at a pan-European level. The coordinators are the most radical and influential leaders amongst the Islamic communities for whom New Year celebrations are absolutely haram because it's the Christian New Year. So each of these individuals try to convince as many followers as possible to join in this stunt in order to advance what is called in Islamic circles stealth jihad. The fact that rapes were reported only in Köln can thus be taken as an indication that rape wasn't part of the plan and things just got out of hand due to sheer numbers and the chaos that emerged. Anyway, hypothesis number 2. The attacks were coordinated at a pan-European level using the already established networks of Islamic terrorism that indeed do exist in Europe, and we've seen them work like clockwork in the Paris attacks, where the supplies, transport, and executions were delivered with an almost militaristic precision. That kind of thing is not the work of amateurs. So using those networks, pulling such a stunt on New Year isn't really that difficult when you think about it. Many people are already in the streets, so it's easy to lose oneself in the crowd, the security is usually lax because there's no way a police force can secure large crowds. Also, let's not forget that communication is easy anyway. I mean, think about it. In many cities, there are sometimes 10,000 or more people in the streets at midnight on December 31st. The idea that the police can track and identify all the threats in that crowd is ludicrous per se. Seriously, it's not humanly possible. Now, I said that I'll forward 2.5 hypotheses, and that's because the third hypothesis is the least likely, in my opinion. Namely that most, if not all of these attacks occurred spontaneously without prior planning, and they were simply united because they were offended by the New Year celebrations. I'm not ruling this out completely, but I think it's the least likely scenario. Anyway, that's my take on these attacks. What do you guys think? Am I being too harsh on the voters? Do you have an alternative hypothesis to the ones I presented? Tell me in the comments, because these kinds of events will continue to happen in 2016, and we need to get an understanding of them in order to develop trade-offs to properly address them. I mean, seriously, this is not a joke. Yeah, sure, it's not as bad as the Paris attacks, but it's still a serious enough issue. And with that being said, thank you for watching and supporting this channel, and I'll see you around. on Freedom Alternative.